What unfolds when a flight attendant questions a quiet man about a modest cross he wears, without realizing that the man is Keanu Reeves? What began as a quiet act of scrutiny over a simple silver crucifix evolved into a profound moment that would deeply stir everyone on board. And by the time the plane landed, no one present would forget what he said, or how it was said. But before we take off, let us know where you're tuning in from. We love reading your reactions. The main terminal of Los Angeles International Airport was alive with its usual chaos. People rushed in every direction, dragging luggage, clutching phones, herding restless kids. Among them moved one man, calm and deliberate, untouched by the flurry. He wore a plain black t-shirt, aged jeans, and scuffed sneakers. No watch, no sunglasses, no entourage. It was Keanu Reeves. Some paused to glance at him, uncertain, doing double takes, but most didn't recognize him. He passed like any other passenger, blending into the crowd yet feeling oddly out of place amid the polished ambience. Yet one detail stood out. Around his neck hung a modest silver crucifix. Not flashy, not large, but quietly powerful, reflecting a weight far beyond its size. Keanu walked with no pretense, no concealment, just himself. When he reached the first-class gate, he stepped into the priority line and handed his boarding pass to the attendant. His name was right there. Clear. Unmistakable. But the woman behind the counter, polished, upright, expression measured, paused. "Ah, sir," she said, brows furrowing slightly. "This line is for first class." Keanu smiled gently. "I'm in the right place." Her name tag read Carla. She double-checked the pass. It was valid. She now recognized the name. Keanu Reeves. But the casual look, the sneakers, the lack of star, had thrown her. Even after the verification, she hesitated. There was no rule being broken, yet something in her expression suggested discomfort. She waved him through, but her eyes followed, lingering longer than necessary. He walked calmly down the corridor, unbothered, and took his first-class seat. Like he'd done it 100 times. Carla, however, kept watching. There was something about him. Something that didn't sit right. Maybe it was his ease. Maybe it was the crucifix, now more visible against his shirt as he adjusted his seatbelt. Maybe it was how out of sync his humility felt in that space. Whatever it was, she couldn't shake it. She stood quietly at the galley, peeking down the aisle toward him. And something inside her, something small, but sharp, began to shift. Carla kept glancing down the aisle. Keanu sat still, settled deeply into his seat. He wasn't watching the in-flight screen, nor flipping through a magazine. He was simply there. Still. Present. The hum of the aircraft filled the air. Outside, rooftops blurred into the clouds. Inside, a hush settled in the first-class cabin, meant for relaxation, but now thick with something quieter. Something unsettled. And the crucifix? It rested gently over his chest, perfectly centered, silver and soft against black fabric. Not bright. Not loud. But undeniably visible. Its edges were worn, slightly dulled with time. A piece clearly lived in, not bought for display. Carla peeked again. She couldn't stop herself. That necklace, it stirred something in her. Not anger. Not fear. Just discomfort. It wasn't that she hadn't dealt with high-profile passengers before. She had. Often. Loud ones. Entitled ones. Flashy ones. But this was different. He wasn't trying to stand out. Yet here he was, impossible to ignore. She stepped into the aisle. Slow, cautious. Each footstep quiet, controlled. Stopping beside him, she leaned down slightly. "Sir," she began, keeping her voice low and diplomatic. "We ask that visible religious items be kept discreet in the first-class cabin. Just to maintain neutrality." Keanu turned to her, slowly. Calmly. His face unreadable. "Have I broken a rule?" he asked. Her voice stayed even, but her words sharpened. It's not a matter of policy violation. It's about shared space. Some passengers may feel uncomfortable with overt religious expressions. He looked at her, then down at the crucifix. I've flown like this for years, he replied. No one's ever said a word. Carla paused. That wasn't the response she had prepared for. Well, she said finally, passengers are more sensitive now. Things are different. We simply ask for mutual respect. She motioned vaguely at the necklace. Maybe you could tuck it inside your shirt. Keanu didn't move. This isn't jewelry, he said quietly. It's part of who I am. Her smile was tight. A mask more than a gesture. Of course. We respect that. But in premium cabins, we ask that passengers keep expressions subtle. Across the aisle, a woman raised her head slightly. 2 rows back, a man turned his body ever so slightly. The cabin was beginning to listen. With all due respect, Keanu said, still measured, it feels like I'm being singled out. Carla blinked. Excuse me? If someone else wore a pendant of a tree, or a stone, or a star, would you ask them to hide it? She opened her mouth. Closed it. That's not what this is about, she said quickly. Then what is it about? Silence. Carla stepped back. I'll give you a moment, she said, voice clipped. Keanu exhaled, softly. This necklace, he said, has held me together when nothing else did. In places I can't forget. In moments I didn't think I'd make it through. His voice was low. But it carried. I won't hide it. Not now. Not ever. Carla's face shifted, just slightly. A crack in the train poise. Others saw it. Passengers began exchanging looks. Someone lifted a phone. Began recording, subtly. Keanu didn't notice. He wasn't here to cause a stir. But the room was beginning to turn. And Carla? She was starting to lose something she didn't even realize she'd been holding, control. The air inside the cabin had changed. Not dramatically. Not noisily. But undeniably. It was the kind of shift that made people sit straighter, turn pages more slowly, glance sideways instead of forward. Carla stood near the galley, arms crossed, jaw tight. The conversation hadn't gone as expected. And something about Keanu's calm, the crucifix still resting plainly on his chest, was now bothering her more than she could admit. She was trained to manage situations. To de-escalate. To lead. And now? She felt judged. Not just by him. By the other passengers. And worse, by herself. She tapped her fingers against the tablet mounted on the cart. Her uniform felt stiffer, heavier than usual. The collar tugged against her neck. She turned sharply. Nicole, she said, calling to the younger flight attendant. Nicole blinked, startled. Yes? Come with me. Up front. Nicole hesitated. Is everything all right? Carla's voice was measured. Too measured. We have a situation. I'm escalating. The younger attendant followed reluctantly. Back at Keanu's row, passengers pretended to be immersed in books, movies, headsets. But their focus was elsewhere. A man near the bulkhead rested his phone on the armrest, camera angled just so. Another passenger 2 rows back slowly removed their earbuds. Keanu, however, remained still. He hadn't changed positions. He hadn't even shifted his gaze. The crucifix sat like an anchor, silent, clear, unhidden. Carla returned with Nicole trailing behind. Her stance was tighter now. Her voice louder. Mr. Reeves, she said, you are continuing to disregard crew instructions. If this persists, I'll be forced to notify the captain. Keanu turned his head. Calm as before. Because I'm wearing a necklace? Carla flushed slightly. For ignoring a crew member's directive during active flight. Her words were rehearsed. Dry. but in the hush of the cabin, they rang hollow. More heads turned. People were listening now. Fully. No more pretending. Nicole looked from Carla to Keanu, uncertainty clear on her face. Maybe, Nicole began gently, we should speak to the captain together before it goes that far. Carla shot her a glare, sharp, silencing. But the shift had already happened. Carla's authority was slipping. She could feel it. And everyone else could see it. Moments later, the cockpit door opened. Captain Morales stepped out, calm, mid-50s, firm and grounded. The kind of man who didn't have to raise his voice to quiet a room. He walked down the aisle without rushing. When he reached the galley, Carla stepped forward quickly. Sir, she began, passenger in 2A has refused multiple requests to conceal a religious item. I believe it's creating discomfort among others. Morales didn't interrupt. He nodded, absorbing her tone. Then turned to Nicole. What's your read? Nicole took a breath. He's been respectful. Quiet. He didn't escalate. He just didn't want to take off his necklace. Morales nodded again. Then continued toward 2A. The passengers watched silently, sensing something significant was about to unfold. He stopped beside Keanu. Mr. Reeves, he said evenly, I understand there's been a disagreement. I'd like to understand it from your side. Keanu met his eyes. Calm. Present. She asked me to hide this, he said, touching the crucifix softly. Said it might make others uncomfortable. He paused. I told her this isn't a symbol of ideology. It's not meant to provoke. It's something that held me together when nothing else did. I wear it, he said softly, because I survived. Silence followed. A still, honest silence. Captain Morales didn't speak immediately. He looked down at the necklace. Then at Carla. Did he say anything inappropriate? He asked. Carla opened her mouth. But the words didn't come. He turned to Nicole. Anything aggressive? Nicole shook her head. No, sir. Captain Morales exhaled slowly. Then gave a simple nod. I don't see any issue here. Then he turned and walked away, quietly, confidently, leaving a silence that said more than any announcement could. Carla remained near the galley, half hidden behind the curtain. But she wasn't resting. Her phone buzzed again. Then again. Then again. She hadn't checked it. She didn't need to. She already knew. The moment was online. Passengers had been recording. Her voice. Her tone. The way she asked Keanu Reeves to hide his crucifix. It was out there now, looping in millions of screens around the world. And it wasn't outrage that hit her first. It was recognition. For the first time, she saw the scene not from her own eyes, but from theirs. From Nicole's. From the cameras. From Keanu's. She saw how calmly he had spoken. How he hadn't raised his voice. How he had simply existed. Fully himself. Unapologetically. And she saw how she had tried to shrink that. She had told herself she was enforcing policy. That she was preserving peace. But really? She had been protecting her own discomfort. A voice rose in her mind, soft, distant, familiar. Her grandmother's voice. Kindness isn't how loud you smile. It's how quiet you allow others to be. She had spent years hiding behind policies. Procedures. Perfect posture. But now, there was nowhere left to hide. From the speakers above came the sound of Captain Morales' voice over the intercom. Measured. Steady. Absolute. This airline is committed to honoring the dignity of every individual, regardless of faith, expression, or tradition. We believe in a sky where everyone travels freely, fully, and respectfully. He didn't mention names. But everyone understood. Keanu sat still in 2A. He hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. The crucifix still rested over his heart, gentle, visible, and silent. He didn't look proud. He didn't look smug. And somehow, that made it even more powerful. Carla remained behind the curtain. Her throat tight. Her stomach twisted. But not with panic. With shame. And underneath that, something deeper. Conviction. She wiped her eyes. Then stepped forward. Toward seat 2A. The walk toward seat 2A felt longer than it ever had. Carla could feel every pair of eyes on her. Some wide with curiosity. Some sharpened with judgment. But none of it stopped her. She reached his row, and paused. Keanu sat just as he had before. Still. Present. Unbothered. The crucifix still visible over his shirt, untouched by everything that had unfolded. Carla opened her mouth. But no words came. So instead, her body spoke. She lowered herself to her knees. A gasp rippled across the cabin. "I was wrong," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "I told myself I was protecting the cabin. That I was being professional. But really, I was just protecting my own discomfort." Her eyes welled with tears. "I've lived behind neutrality. I thought it made me fair. But it made me blind." She looked up at him. "I'm sorry." The cabin was silent. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. For a moment, Keanu said nothing. Then, gently, he stood. He extended his hand. Carla took it. He helped her to her feet, not to make a point, but to offer presence. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was respectful. Human. She stood in front of him, still shaken. But something had changed. Her posture no longer stiff. No longer guarded. Just real. "I used to believe in something," she said softly. "Before the rules. Before the fear." Keanu gestured to the seat beside him. "Sit," he said. She did. Not as a flight attendant. Not as a professional. But as someone who had just remembered who they used to be. Carla sat beside him, her posture softer now. No longer upright for performance. No longer acting from training manuals or checklists. She simply sat. "I used to believe in something," she repeated quietly, her gaze forward. "Before this job. Before the rules and scripts. Before I forgot." Keanu didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just listened. Around them, the cabin had fallen into a respectful silence. No more glances of ridicule. No whispers of judgment. Only presence. Peace. A quiet surrender to something bigger than ego. Carla turned to him. "I don't know how to undo what I did." Keanu met her eyes. "You don't have to undo it," he said, softly. "You just have to face it." He let go of her hand, gently. "That's more than most people ever do." She blinked, absorbing the words. And for the first time in a long time, she felt lighter. The passengers around them didn't look away. But they weren't looking at her in condemnation anymore. They were moved. Changed. Even those who hadn't spoken a word now carried it in their eyes. Not the drama of what happened, but the power of what followed. Keanu leaned back in his seat. Still silent. Still steady. The crucifix resting quietly over his heart, unmoved. The symbol hadn't needed to shout. It had simply stayed. Time passed. No announcements were made. No speeches delivered. But the cabin had changed. The quiet no longer felt tense. It felt sacred. People who once watched with suspicion now sat with a strange stillness, like they had witnessed something they weren't supposed to, but were grateful they had. Keanu didn't say another word. He didn't need to. His presence was the message. And the necklace? Still hanging in place. Still visible. Still soft in its strength. Carla sat in her jump seat during descent, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't reach for her phone, didn't check the airline portal, didn't tap into the crew chat. She simply breathed. She thought about what it meant to her, something that kept you whole. Not as decoration, but as memory, as promise, as survival. The aircraft touched down at LAX with the usual bounce and roar. But inside, no one clapped. No one moved too quickly. They were still carrying something. Something invisible. Carla stood at the exit door, as required. Keanu passed her with a small nod. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. And his did too. She watched him disappear into the jet bridge, alone, unescorted, silent. No cameras. No entourage. Just a man who refused to hide. The next day, Carla didn't return to work. She called in for personal time. Not because of shame, but because something inside her was shifting, and she knew she needed space to feel it. She stayed in her apartment with the blinds drawn, the world muted. Her phone never stopped buzzing. Dozens of missed calls. Hundreds of messages. And the video? Everywhere. Clips of her asking Keanu to hide the crucifix. Clips of him refusing, calmly, gently. Clips of her apology. Her kneeling. The world had seen it. But strangely, she wasn't afraid. Because something else had happened. She could see the comments now with clearer eyes. She listened. She changed. She faced it. And the ones that hit hardest were the ones that didn't scream, they just whispered truth. That's what grace looks like. She opened her drawer and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside it, the crucifix. The one Keanu had given her. Quietly. Without a word. After the flight. Before disappearing into the crowd. She held it in her hand. And for the first time in years, she let herself cry. Not out of guilt, but out of release. 2 weeks later, Carla sat in front of her phone. No makeup. No uniform. No script. Just her. In her hand, the crucifix. She set the phone on a windowsill, where soft daylight poured across her face. Then, she hit record. She didn't prepare a speech. She didn't rehearse. She simply spoke. I spent years believing that being professional meant hiding. She looked down at the silver cross in her fingers. Hiding what I felt. What I believed. Who I was. A pause. Then her gaze returned to the lens, clearer than it had ever been. But this reminded me what it means to be human. She held the crucifix closer for the camera to see. This isn't about a symbol. It's about remembering who we are when no one's watching. She smiled. Gently. I don't hide anymore. Then, after a beat, her voice softened even more. Thank you, Keanu. She ended the recording. And just sat there. Still holding the cross. Not because she needed to be seen, but because she had finally seen herself. The camera stopped recording. But Carla didn't move. She sat quietly, her fingers wrapped around the crucifix, not as a symbol of faith alone, but of courage. Of clarity. Of grace. She didn't post the video right away. She didn't need applause. What she had now was something deeper. Peace. And a memory, etched not by humiliation, but by transformation. That flight never made headlines for scandal. But it did become something else. A quiet reminder. That stillness can speak louder than arguments. That faith doesn't need defense, it just needs space. That the strongest people aren't always the loudest. Keanu Reeves never spoke about it publicly. He didn't need to. He had already said everything that mattered, without raising his voice. Carla returned to work weeks later, not as a different person, but as a more honest one. She still wore the same uniform. But now, she wore her humanity with it. passengers continued to board. Flights continued to depart. But every so often, someone would pause at her gate, look at her with quiet recognition, and smile. Not because they remembered what she had done, but because they remembered what she had become.